Hey everyone, it's Tuesday, and you are here at Litvak Leadership Live. And you may be saying, Sean, your background, it's changed. It looks like you're on the inside of a car. And yes, I'm on the inside of a car because I still, have a job, and I was out visiting prospects. And then on the expressway, it said my destination was delayed by 3 hours. 3 hours. So I'm an hour from where I need to be, but I'm really 3 hours away if traffic ever dissipates. But that's my story. Today, we are speaking with Kai Leifert, who is going to talk with us about culture, the importance of culture, what it means, and how to achieve it. Kai has an incredible background in finance and realized eventually that he really wanted to pursue leadership and training people about leadership. So, Kai, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Quite delighted to be here. And I've said to Sean initially, I saw the same background as you do, and so that's real dedication because Sean is doing this 5 days a week and has met some incredible people. And I've watched quite a few videos now. Very delighted to be here. As Sean said, I said this to him just in advance of this conversation. Sometimes I feel tiny bit like a fraud because I talk about leadership, I talk about careers and how you can integrate everything into your life. And one of the most important and first questions I always get is, how do I find my passion and how do I decide what I want to do? And in my personal case, it kind of has been the other way around. Just because, like, since I was 12 years old, I started to trade stocks, and I don't judge me on that, but it was that I seemed to know exactly what I wanted to do, and I ended up in finance, had a great career, as Sean said. But then I still got to the same point, and that's why I'm very grateful to actually have this journey and share this experience with you guys. Because I still ended up to say, okay, what am I doing here? What do I really want to do? But along the way, I learned a whole lot about leadership, luckily for me, and that's something I'm very passionate to share with you.
Excellent, excellent. So, Kai, you began in finance, like you said, and now you're in leadership. So, what was the tipping point that made you decide to pursue your passion?
It's a really good question. I ask myself that a lot. When I started working, very ironically, I started to be in leadership roles very early on. I think after the first real employer, I started my career there, and after 3 months, I was named head of the department. So I've done leadership most of my life, but I stopped at some stage when I was quite successful, and it wasn't that I didn't enjoy it anymore. I loved what I was doing, but I was thinking to myself, what would I be really proud of at the end of my life? And at that specific point, I said to myself, I at least want to have 2 careers in a lifetime. I was very sure of all the things I've done, but I've done them for 20 years. What about something else? And that something else wasn't leadership. That something else was that I was already flying as a private pilot, especially in the US, very common, a little bit less common here in Europe. But still, I've enjoyed that for a number of years. And I thought, well, if I've done that, maybe I can fly commercially. And so I did. And I realized that it doesn't really matter so much what you do, but the outlook and how you can integrate all of that into your life. And this is where the whole passion also re-engaged for leadership. So yes, I was flying commercially. I've done that now for 3 years, still do that part-time. But I noticed that I love the variety of doing different things. I never stopped.
All right.
I never stopped doing some of the things I did in finance. I still do some consulting. I have great days out when I fly planes, but then I was missing that interaction that you and I have when we talk about leadership and the things that we've learned. That's where, so actually, let me start there. We just discussed that before when Sean started to do these shows here, and quite similarly, about a year and a half ago, I started with my YouTube channel, which initially was more about business, but developed into a lot of leadership topics from there.
Okay, so when you look at leadership, how do you define it?
It's quite a funny question, because we discussed this. A small group of different leaders from different industries have a small group room in Clubhouse, this new app that everybody's talking about. And we went around the room to define leadership. And I said, well, let me keep this simple. If I look behind me and there's nobody there, then I'm not a leader. But I think that's exactly my definition. Is it a journey that I can take somebody on? You know, I get a lot of people asking me, well, how do I become a better leader? How do I lead when I'm not put in charge? But I think leadership has very little to do with the authority that we are given. Leadership has everything to do with having a vision, having a goal, and wanting to help other people to get there with you.
So, you know, people talk about having a vision and having a goal. Do you see vision and goals as the same thing, or do you see them as different?
I do see them different. A vision for me is something, let's say, actually, this is something I dream of.
Okay.
This is something that I wish to realize. This is what I can envisage in my head. But the problem with that is, if you now take this and make this your goal, you're in for disappointment, because you can only partly control the outcome of your vision. You know, you need other people, you need sometimes external circumstances, sometimes you need a bit of luck. But how I would how I differentiate the two is, if I have a vision, I can then define goals that are completely in my control. And if I define goals that support that vision, you know, even if at times I don't achieve quite my vision yet, I know I've done my best because I have achieved the goals, and they have to be in my control. And that's kind of where I draw the line, because I don't want to, like anyone else, I hate to be disappointed, right?
So I've heard it said recently that a vision is something that affects either society as a whole or your immediate influence, whereas goals are more personal. Would you agree with that?
They can. I agree with the fact that they can, but we often can get very hung up on this term that our vision has to be something that's going beyond ourselves, affects society, has this great impact. And often it can have that, but I think for most people, the vision is something, how do they want to structure their life? I mean, if I have a vision, it's a silly example, but if I have a vision that I want to fly 2 days a week and teach leadership 3 days for the rest of the week, that's a vision, but that doesn't quite change society, right? But it's something that affects me personally. Now, I can set goals around that. Of course, if you are ambitious, if you're a high achiever, then you're not only talking about those visions. Then you think, okay, with the things that I've been given, with the strengths I have, what do I want to achieve? And that's why I say I agree that they can do, but I would I would caution ourselves to say, well, this vision that we want to create for ourselves has to do that, because the vision is something very personal to you and has to make you happy rather than everybody else.
So when you look at the importance of culture, because that's one of the things that you have posted about, how do you see culture and leadership interacting with one another?
Thanks for asking. It's a great question. I'm very passionate about the topic of culture for the simple reason that sometimes we are told, well, it's very easy, right? You build a great culture, and that means you have a great company, and then you have a lot of happy employees in that company. And that's just not true. That's not how it works, because a culture has to be something that supports a goal and an end outcome. For me, culture is something that affects a specific group of people. It affects a very specific goal, and it's also made for a very specific time. Let me give you an example.
Please.
What's a good culture, right? So let's assume we have a company and they want to create a new product. Then I would say, well, a great culture is if you are innovative and you try things out, and you want to be a little bit of a risk taker as well. Because that's how we create new products. That's what makes a good culture. And if you take those three terms, let's be innovative and risk-taking and try things out, and you put that into the context of an airline pilot, that's quite scary.
Oh, yeah.
You don't want that. And that's why I say you can't start with, let's build a great culture and the rest comes. What you have to start with in every company is to say, what are we trying to do here? What do we want to build that culture around? And I think for especially entrepreneurs, for small business owners, is one of the very difficult questions to answer. What do I want to be known for?
Interesting. So when people answer that question as to what do I want to be known for, what do the answers reveal about the individual?
There are probably two camps. Well, there are three camps. The third one is where they know exactly what they want to do and they live by it, but it's a very small percentage. One person I know, I talked to and said, well, what's the one thing you want to be known for? And I says, actually, I've never thought about that. And he's building a new company. I said, well, you can't build a culture around it because your staff has no idea what you stand for. So that's one camp. But the more common theme I see is, if you ask, what do you want to be known for? A lot of people come up with at least one or two really good answers. Giving you an example again, somebody said to me, well, we want to be really client-centric about this specific subject. I said, okay. So if it's not an end client, but it's another company who comes to you and asks you to do business with them, and you will earn a lot of money, are you saying no? And he said, no, I wouldn't be saying no, right? And so the second camp is, yes, we've defined it, but it's not ingrained in the whole business. I call it, let's make one big decision to make all the small decisions disappear, right? If you make this one decision, okay, we want to be client-centric in this specific area, you also made a lot of small decisions where you have to say no. And that's something I see rarely happening. And I think that's the one big obstacle to creating a good and as in a functional culture in an organization.
Got it. So where do you go to be inspired?
Good question. I used to get very inspired by traveling because I've worked in different parts of the world. I was responsible for Europe and Asia. and we got a variety of different cultures in Europe, and then obviously Asia is a different topic altogether. And it inspired me because people do things so differently in each culture, but there are little bits and pieces that you can take away and that you can apply at home, and that's what worked very well for me. Obviously, just in the last 12 or 14 months, I haven't done that.
Got it. So if it was traveling, what is it now?
It's the virtual travel. I still enjoy having conversations like with yourself. I mentioned there are a few other people that I connect with very regularly who are either on YouTube providing leadership advice or who are personal or business coaches that I connect with. So these one-to-one conversations are just something that I enjoy doing. Not to like sit in the limelight and shine, but just to see, like, kick around a few ideas. Say, well, what's your idea of culture? Because, you know, what I told you is my experience of how I saw culture over the last 20 years, but that doesn't make it right. It makes it right for me. But
Absolutely.
for somebody else, it may be completely different.
So what do you see as one's engagement with faith, in engagement with the supernatural, as a facet, a foundational facet of their leadership?
Can you explain a bit what you mean by that?
Well, so, you know, do you think that it is important to believe in God to be a good leader? Do you think it is important to walk out one's faith, to study the Bible, to read the Bible, to attend? Some would use the word religion. I like the word faith instead. Gatherings of individuals. Do you see faith and or religion as an important facet of an individual to be a good leader?
I see faith and religion, for lack of a better word, as a very important aspect of a person. So I'm quite religious myself. I've been raised in Christian faith. I've even held a number of ministerial posts in a church there. So I believe that it's very helpful, it's very beneficial to have that side of us as us in human beings, right? But I can't say, okay, this is a necessary item for leaders. Maybe in my opinion, yes. It makes it easier. It makes it often a lot more helpful to create a culture of trust and collaboration. So all these things are true. But you and I know that regardless of what topic we are looking at, it's not the religion or the faith that makes us successful in any particular thing. Our faith is there to guide us into our spiritual being, to guide us into ultimately bringing us closer to God. But we've seen in history and in our surroundings that doesn't really correlate to success or sometimes being a better leader. So
well, yes and no. When you look at your own experience ministerially, I mean, I have led ministry, jail ministry, men's ministry, greeting ministry, just to name a few, and been involved in church leadership. How have, in your experience in ministry, what have you taken from it and folded into your leadership style?
Mm-hmm. Good question. I think the one part that is really helpful and that connects as well is connecting us to the emotional aspect of our staff, with no doubt. I was actually having an interview with a psychologist not very long ago, a couple of weeks ago, old friend of mine who is leading an occupational health practice for a big company, and he's also has his own small business. And he says, especially in the times that we are going through right now, where many of us lead from a distance, we lead from home, we have our staff at the other end of a Zoom call rather than in person, having this emotional connection is something where I think our faith, our belief in something that can connect us is helpful, because you don't want to purely talk about business all the time. You want to connect on a very personal level as well. It's interesting you say that, because there's another aspect where I'd say we have to draw the line somewhere. I think one aspect of leadership, it's not the main aspect. The main aspect of leadership is leading people to a goal. But in order to do that, you have to execute, right? And I think where we have to pay close attention is those people who we entrust with the execution of our plans. They have to be good at it. You can be a good ministerial leader and a terrible organizer, and that's okay. And equally, you may not be able to connect as emotionally with people around you, and you're a great organizer. And I think we need both people when we talk about just the pure subject of leadership.
So how do you think leaders should motivate people?
For me, what worked for me are three things. The first one is actually having trust in the employees that they can do the job that you hire them to do. Because if they can't, it's not their fault, it's your fault. So
Indeed.
you have to have the trust that they can actually do what they got to do. The second thing as a leader is you need to be able to give them a great idea of where you are going. And I'm not meaning those big strategy calls that you have in organizations where in 2 hours you say, this is like our big vision and goal. What I mean by that is to explain to each individual how their personal contribution helps this big goal of the company. Okay, so you are a driver, great, but because you drive, here is the outcome of that. Here is how it supports the whole organization. So to connect the two. And the third one is simply cheering them on, not only with, hey, good job, but being specific, thanking people, giving them the knowledge that their work is visible, their work is seen.
Interesting. So when you look at how to cheer people on, some people enjoy public adulation, others are mortified by it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find that balance of, cheering people on publicly versus privately, and so it has the greatest impact?
Yeah, there is certainly no one size fits all, absolutely. I'd say, well, first of all, some of it comes with experience, right? I certainly have made my number of errors of praising people in public who were mortified, as you say, and I didn't do that again. But I think when you can connect with people, when we can sit down with them, you get to, not on day one, obviously, but you get to know them quite quickly. Mm-hmm. And I have worked with very, let me call them introverted individuals.
Yeah.
Who just take great pride in their work, and they don't need all this praise, etc. What worked very well for me is a very simple, hey, I've seen you've done that. This is really great work. And then I went to my boss and said, hey, next time you see this individual, can you tell them? And so they did. And that had an incredibly powerful impact on that kind of individual, yes.
So when you talk about communicating strategy and everyone has a role. How do you determine um, how to communicate just too much to encourage others to stretch? Because if you just communicate to their capabilities, they're like, oh, this is easy. But if you communicate beyond that, you run the risk of blowing them out, but at the same time, you want to encourage them to stretch. How do you do that?
Uh, I don't know if I totally agree with that,
Okay.
because I have worked with people who were very happy to be at a certain level, and that's all they wanted to be. And I have certainly tried to stretch them beyond that, and they said no. Sometimes not in words, but by their actions. And you learn from that. And not everyone needs to be constantly rising through the career ladder. Because sometimes your priorities lie elsewhere. I think if I go and have conversations with those individuals and say, hey, listen, this is where we are going, this is where you are. What do you think? Is there something more we could be doing? Is there something more you should be doing? Is there something that I can do to help you be better or faster or more diligent, whatever it is? If you give that baton to your employee and say, hey, what do I need to start, stop, or continue doing so that you can succeed, you get a very good impression of whether people want to stretch further or not.
Okay. So when you sit down with someone to discuss their goals, and there's short term, there's long term, there's midterm, how many goals do you think an individual should have? I'm going to leave the question there. How many goals should an individual have?
I'll be cheeky. I think a person should have one priority. And that's simply because when the word priority was defined, it was defined by one. There was no such thing as priorities. And then, frankly, how many ever goals you need to support that priority. So if we think of a sales manager and the priority is to increase client satisfaction, that person will be much more able to tell me what needs to be done to get there, and we can form goals around it. So I would never tie myself down to, oh, here's the number of goals. Yeah, it can be ridiculous. Nobody can do 7, 10, 12 goals. Of course not. But if you keep it simple and say, hey, this is one priority, what goals do we have to define around that to make this work? That's kind of the approach I took.
So when you say one priority, I want to explore this a little further because that really resonates with me. Is it you should have one priority for your job with your employer and one priority for your family, or should you have one priority?
I think if you have one priority in life, it's this one big decision that I was talking about before, and all the little decisions fall into place. It doesn't mean that, okay, so if this one, I had an employee, his priority was his family life.
Okay.
Simple as that. He wasn't a bad employee. He was actually one of the top performers, but his priority was the family life. That I knew. I would never call him on a weekend. He would go home at 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock sometimes, and that was that. That was his priority, and that's fine. Now, in the job itself, I would still say, listen, okay, that's that. But here in this job, what's the one priority that we work on? Obviously, we have to do that because you hire somebody to do a certain job. But but that's me, right? That's what I see for that employee. But I'm sure for that same person, that priority wasn't like the top thing. If that interfered with his priority of family life, I knew I would lose, and that's okay.
So, Erit Kaldkep, former guest and frequent viewer of the show, and since I'm on my phone, I don't want to try and tap it and put it up and screw up the video. Is asking, what is your priority, Kai? And I will say, don't feel obligated to share it, because I know what my one priority is, and I don't know if I want to tell everybody. But
that's true. That's true, and I very much avoid sharing goals in particular. But as it comes to priority, mine is to actually share. How do I say this succinctly? Like, it's so clear in my head, and when you have to put it out on paper, it's more difficult, right? Effectively share what I've learned over the past 20 years while living a life with quite a diverse amount of activities that I have, if that makes sense. So I won't go into the details of what all the activities are, but I know myself by now to know that I like variety. So if you put me into one thing only for the rest of my life, I'll be unhappy. And if you put me in a plane tomorrow and onto this call here and this interview today, and tomorrow I'm recording a YouTube video, and the day after I'm traveling to wherever that is when we can again, that's kind of how I see it. But the priority is, how can I use all these things around to really share what I've learned with people who are in a similar situation.
Fantastic. So we've gone 32 minutes in our 30-minute show. You've provided
feels much shorter.
Always feels shorter. You've provided a ton of information, and I really just want to highlight on the one priority, then all the goals needed to support that priority. Let me tell you, that is something that is ringing true for me. So thank you for being on the show today. I know that if I picked up on that, there are things that other people picked up on that I'm sure are ringing true with them. So Kai, thank you for being my guest today. Everyone else, this has been Litvak Leadership Live, the mobile version. We'll be back tomorrow. And hey, we're going to be mobile tomorrow too, because I'm going on a trip. So we're going to be mobile tomorrow. Different person, different topic, different geography, but still Litvak Leadership Live. Enjoy the day and be blessed. Bye now.